The dust in the Wyoming Territory didn't just settle. It tasted of iron and grit, a constant reminder of a hard land that took more than it ever gave. In the year 1883, the wind across the plains carried the scent of sagebrush and the distant lonely cry of a coyote. But in the heart of the town, the talk was of something far more dangerous. It was about a woman, a ranch, and a black beast that seemed to have been forged in the fires of hell itself. Nora stood on her wide wraparound porch, her silhouette framed by the setting sun. She was a widow, though the term felt too small for the vast emptiness she carried. Her husband, Silas, had been dead 3 years, taken by a sudden violent fever that had swept through the valley like a scythe. Silas had been a man of gentle strength, and the only creature that truly matched his spirit was Storm, a stallion with a coat as black as a midnight inkwell, and a heart that had once been filled with loyalty. When Silas died, something in Storm died with him. The friendly, spirited horse had transformed overnight into a vessel of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't just buck cowboys, he hunted them. He fought the saddle as if it were a straitjacket, and saw every rider as an insult to the memory of the only man he had ever loved. Nora had watched the ranch fall into a state of quiet mourning. She didn't need the money, but she needed to see if the world still held a man with the soul her husband possessed. She put out the word $100 to any man who can ride Storm. But if you fail, don't show your face here again. This ranch has no room for the weak. The promise of $100, a fortune in those days, spread like a wildfire across the territory. It reached the ears of the desperate, the arrogant, and the brave. For months, the local clinic had been a revolving door of shattered collarbones, cracked ribs, and men who would never walk straight again. Storm had become a legend, a black ghost that no man could tame. Far across the rolling hills, working a dusty, forgotten corner of the Sundance Ranch, lived a man named Pat. He had spent 15 years tending to the horses of the Sundance, a man of few words and calloused hands. He didn't have much to his name, just a saddle, a bedroll, and a reputation among the older hands as a man who could whisper the wild out of a Mustang. Pat's closest friend was Lucas, a younger cowboy, with a heart of gold but a string of luck so bad it bordered on the cursed. Lucas had a wife, Martha, and an 8-year-old son named Jed. Jed was a bright-eyed boy who followed his father like a shadow, despite the fact that Lucas had recently lost his steady work and was struggling to put meat on the table. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucas approached Pat near the stables. His eyes were wide with a frantic sort of hope. "Pat, I heard it in town today," Lucas said, his voice hushed, as if the wind might steal the opportunity. "There's a widow over in the next county, a rich one. She's got a stallion she calls Storm. She's offering $100 cash to anyone who can stay in the saddle. Pat, I lost the job at the mill. Jed needs boots, and Martha, she's sewing patches on patches. I have to go." Ted stopped brushing the bay mare he was working on. He turned slowly, his eyes hard and knowing. "I've heard of that horse, Lucas. He's not a bronch you can outride. He's a grief-stricken animal that wants to kill whatever is on his back. You're a fair hand, but you aren't ready for that kind of war. Stay here, we'll find you work, even if I have to split my own wages." But Lucas was a man driven by the sight of his son's empty plate. "I'm not asking for a handout, Pat. I'm asking for a chance. $100 changes everything for us." Against Pat's warnings, Lucas packed his meager belongings, hoisted Jed onto the back of his aging gelding, and rode toward Nora's ranch. He arrived at high noon, the heat shimmering off the corral. He saw the crowd gathered, other cowboys, some limping, some boasting, and he saw the woman on the porch. Nora stepped down, her black dress trailing in the dust. She looked at Lucas, then her gaze softened, or perhaps sharpened, when she saw young Jed clinging to his father's waist. "You brought a child to this place?" Nora asked, her voice like a cold wind through a canyon. Do you know what that beast does to men? I know, Lucas said, his jaw tight. And I know I need that money. I'm a good rider, ma'am. I've broken my share of stock. Nora looked at the boy, then back at the father. A strange impulse took her. I'll tell you what, cowboy, your desperation is written all over your face. If you can ride him, I won't give you 100. I'll give you 150, but there's a price for the risk. If you fail, I'm keeping that boy here. He'll be fed, he'll be clothed, and he'll sleep in a real bed. But you won't take him back to whatever hole you crawled out of until you return with a real cowboy. A man who can actually do the job. You're gambling with more than your bones today. Do we have a deal? Lucas looked at the $150 in his mind's eye. He looked at Jed. He thought of Pat's warning and pushed it away. Deal, he whispered. He entered the corral. Storm was waiting in the corner, his black coat shimmering with sweat, his eyes rolling back to show the whites. The moment Lucas touched the stirrup, the air seemed to vibrate. Lucas managed to swing over, his hands gripping the reins with the strength of a drowning man. He lasted 10 seconds. It wasn't just a buck, it was a violent spinning contortion that sent Lucas sailing through the air like a discarded rag doll. He hit the fence hard, the breath leaving his body in a sickening grunt. He was lucky to be alive. Nora didn't offer a hand. She stood over him as he gasped for air in the dirt. I told you, now leave. Go find the man you should have been. The boy stays with me until the debt of your arrogance is paid. Lucas rode back to the Sundance Ranch with a broken spirit and a heart heavy with shame. When he found Pat, he collapsed, sobbing out the story, the wager, the horse, and the fact that Jed was now a guest of a woman who had no pity. Pat's fury was a quiet, terrifying thing. He didn't shout, he didn't throw his hat. He simply walked to his horse and began to cinch his saddle. I warned you, Lucas, Pat said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. That boy is 8 years old. He's sitting in a stranger's house because you wanted to play the hero. Pat, please, Lucas begged. You're the only one. I've seen you ride the horses the devil himself couldn't touch. If you don't help me, I don't know if I'll ever see my son again. Martha, she'll kill me if I go home alone. Pat looked at his friend, a man broken by poverty and pride. I'm going for Jed, not for you, and sure as hell not for the money. They rode out the next morning. When they reached the ranch, the scene was the same. Men were failing, the dust was flying, and Storm was winning. But Pat didn't approach the corral. He didn't ask for the reins. Instead, he pulled his horse up near the fence and sat. For the rest of that day, Pat did nothing but watch. He watched the way Storm moved when no one was near him. He watched the way the horse's ears flicked at the sound of Nora's voice. He watched the rhythm of the stallion's breathing, noting the hitch in his chest that spoke of a deep, unhealed trauma. Nora noticed him immediately. She had seen 1,000 cowboys, but never one who sat so still for so long. On the second day, Pat was still there, a silent statue on the fence line. He ate his hardtack and drank his water, his eyes never leaving the black horse. On the third day, Lucas approached Nora, who was watching from the porch. This is my friend Pat, the one I told you about. Nora walked down the steps. Her eyes narrowed. She walked straight to the fence where Pat sat. You've been staring at that horse for 48 hours, cowboy. Are you waiting for him to turn into a pony? Or are you just too scared to get your boots dirty? Pat turned his head. His face was weathered, his eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. A man who rushes into a house on fire usually gets burned, Nam, he said calmly. That horse isn't a beast. He's a mourner. You've been sending men in there to break his spirit, but his spirit was already broken 3 years ago. All you're doing is teaching him how to fight back. Nora felt a jolt of recognition. It was the first time anyone had spoken the truth about the horse. And you think you're the one to fix it? Pat hopped down from the fence. He didn't look at the money Nora was holding. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here for the boy. And I'm here because that horse deserves to be seen for what he is, not what you want him to be." Pat didn't take a saddle. He didn't even take a whip. He walked into the corral with his hands empty and his head down. The crowd went silent. Storm, sensing a new presence, began to pace. He snorted, a sound like a steam engine, and his hooves threw up clods of earth. Pat didn't move toward the horse. He walked to the center of the ring and sat down in the dirt. He crossed his legs and began to speak in a low, rhythmic hum. It wasn't a song, it was a vibration. "I know you're tired, Storm," Pat whispered, his voice carrying just enough for the horse to hear. "I know the world feels like a heavy weight since you left. I know every hand that touches you feels like a betrayal. But I'm not him, and I'm not them. I'm just a man who knows what it's like to lose the only thing that made the sunrise worth seeing." The horse stopped pacing. He tilted his head, his large, dark eyes fixing on the man sitting in the dust. Pat continued to talk, telling the horse about the long nights on the trail, about the loneliness of the plains, and about the boy, Jed, who was watching from the window. "You want a friend, don't you? Not a boss, not a rider, just someone to walk beside you in the dark." For 2 hours, Pat sat there. Slowly, he stood up. He didn't approach the horse's head. He approached his side. He let Storm smell his hand, a scent of cedar, old leather, and honest sweat. He put his hand on the horse's temple, right where the pulse throbbed. Storm flinched, his muscles tensing for a strike, but Pat didn't move. He kept his hand steady, pouring his own calm into the animal. Storm let out a long, shuddering breath. It was a sound of surrender, not to a master, but to a companion. Pat slowly, almost imperceptibly, moved to the horse's back. There was no saddle to cinch, no bit to pull. He simply leaned his weight against the stallion and swung up. The crowd held its breath, expecting the explosion. It never came. Storm stood still for a moment. Then, as if responding to a thought rather than a command, he began to walk. It was a smooth, liquid gait. Pat sat tall, his hands resting lightly on the horse's mane. They moved in perfect circles, then broke into a gentle trot. Pat talked to him the whole time, rubbing the horse's neck, acknowledging the pain and the strength within him. They rode for 45 minutes. The sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the ranch. When Pat finally hopped down, the horse didn't bolt. He stayed, nuzzling Pat's shoulder. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Pat ignored them. He walked straight to the porch where Nora stood, her face pale, her eyes wet with tears she hadn't shed in years. "He's a damn good horse, man," Pat said simply. Nora reached into her pocket and pulled out the $100. "You did it. You're the real cowboy. Take it. You've earned more than this." Pat looked at the money, then at Lucas, who was clutching Jed to his chest. "Give it to Lucas," Pat said. "He needs it more than I do. I came for the boy, and I got what I wanted." Nora was taken aback. "You'd walk away from $100? In this country, money don't buy the kind of peace that horse just gave me," Pat replied. Nora watched him, her heart stirring in a way she thought was impossible. Over the next 2 days, Pat stayed at the ranch. He didn't want the glory. He wanted to make sure Storm was truly all right. He spent hours in the stable, grooming the stallion, talking to him and showing Nora how to approach the animal without fear. Nora found herself drawn to the stable more and more. She told Pat about Silas, how he had raised Storm from a colt, how they had been inseparable, and how the horse's rage was the only thing she had left of her husband's passion. "He was a good man," Nora said one evening, looking at Pat over the flickering light of a lantern. "But he's gone, and I've been living in a graveyard for 3 years. Graveyards are for the dead, Nora," Pat said softly. "You and Storm, you're still breathing. There's a lot of horizon left to see. On the third day, Pat prepared to head back to the Sundance Ranch. He had his saddle packed, and he went to say goodbye to Storm. Nora met him at the gate. "Pat," she started, her voice uncharacteristically shy. "I've been watching you. I've watched how you work, how you treat the world, and how you don't have a greedy bone in your body. This ranch is big, and it's lonely. I need a foreman, someone who knows the heart of a horse, and the value of a hard day's work. I'll pay you 3 times what the Sundance gives you, and you'll have a home here. A real home." Pat looked at the wide-open plains, then at the black stallion, and finally at the woman standing before him. He saw the strength in her, the grit that had kept her going, and the kindness that was finally beginning to bloom again. "I reckon I've had enough of sleeping in bunkhouses," Pat said with a slow nod. He stayed, he worked the land, he healed the horses, and he became the anchor. Nora hadn't realized she was drifting without. A month later, as the summer heat began to fade into the cool of autumn, Pat and Nora stood on the porch where the challenge had first been issued. "Pat," Nora said, taking his hand, "you saved this ranch. You saved me. Will you stay for good? As my husband?" Pat didn't need to think. He looked at the woman he had come to love, a woman as resilient as the Wyoming soil. He nodded, his eyes bright. They were married under the vast, unending sky of 1883. And in the distance, standing tall and free in the pasture, was Storm, no longer a beast of rage, but a guardian of the house, a black shadow that reminded them both that even after the fiercest storm, the sun always finds a way to break through.
If you really like our Western stories, your subscription and sharing means more to us than you think.